Okay, this is going to be a how-to video on how to make a color wheel. Okay, so what I have is my paper towel, a brush that's a flat, it's a fairly small flat, not very big, about medium size. A fresh bowl of water, a paper towel penciled already, pencil to label my color wheel with, and of course my acrylics. So I'm going to get my acrylics out. Okay, now these acrylics have been sitting a little while, and so this is starting to get a little icky looking. Thing about it is anything that's on top, if it's a little icky, what's underneath will be fine. So if you guys scrape away the top a little bit, that's fine. My colors are kind of run together, well, touching, but they're not really overlapping, so that's fine. Now you can see here a little bit of the acrylic has started to separate from this color, where the pigment has started to come out of the binder. The binder is the liquid part of the paint. The pigment is the color part. So sometimes with paints they separate. So sometimes you just got to remix it together. With this, it'll be fine. I mean, I still got a lot of pigment right there. Sometimes I can kind of get in the way, but some of your colors may have also kind of separated a little bit. Okay, or you may witness or see that, particularly in a bottle that's been sitting a long time. You'll see you go to pour out some paint, and then nothing but this like clear liquid will come out. So then you gotta do something to mix it together to get that pigment and that binder mixed back together. All right, so we'll set this aside for a second, and then we're going to label our color wheel. Typically, the triangle represents the primary colors, the solid triangle, and the dotted triangle represents the secondary colors. So I've created little places here to where we could label it. So that's the primary, and then the secondary. So typically, a lot of the colors we see has yellow at the top, kind of blue off to the right, and red down the left there. So we'll do that. Okay, for the secondary, yellow, blue, then of course green will have to go here. Then purple will have to go here. And then orange will have to go here. Okay. Now, these are I really don't have a place to label that, so I'll just go ahead and place the word here for what these are. These are the intermediate colors. They're sometimes also called tertiary colors, but so we just go by the primary color first, then the secondary color, and I'll just shorten it to Y and G for yellow green, and then here for B and G for blue green, B and P for blue purple, R and P for red purple, R and O for red orange, and then Y and O for yellow orange. And those are your intermediate colors. Now something important here about the separation of the colors here, what this is, this represents what are the warm colors versus what are the cool colors. So I'm going to label that as well. Okay. All right. So we got it labeled. Now we just need to paint it. Now we will not be using white or black in any of this. Okay. And we have all the colors we need except for the intermediates. The intermediates are going to be the ones we mix. We have our primary colors are yellow, red, and we actually have two blues I like to provide. This is an ultramarine blue, and this is a cobalt blue. You can choose whichever one you want to use in terms of making this color wheel. This one's just kind of a warmer blue. This is kind of a cooler blue. Okay. This will probably make a real dirty looking blue purple, the cool blue, but then the ultramarine blue will probably make a really dirty blue green, if that makes sense. Cause uh, to mix with your purple, it's a warm color. If you take a cool color, a warm color mixed together, it'll be kind of dirty. If you take the same thing here, okay, because green's kind of a cool color. Take a warm blue with a cool green, it's going to make kind of a dirtier color, which we'll get into all about later. Okay. All right. So don't worry about filling in, painting within the edges. That's not an issue here. This is just a chart. Your colors you might have to, because they're so kind of thin, some of them, you might have to reapply a second coat after it's dry. One really important thing is make sure not to get the acrylics on your clothes or on fabrics, and you'll because it won't wash out. And then as far as the brushes go, you'll have to use soap to wash it, or you can ruin a brush. Dried acrylic on a brush will not come out. And what happens is the paint, if you rinse it out, it might look clean, but down the inside, down in between the bristles, on the inside, down towards where it gets towards this metal part, the ferrule, where it gets really tight in there, paint particles will be caught in there that won't rinse out with water. You have to use soap to get those out, and what happens is it'll start hardening from the inside out, and therefore it won't bend as much anymore. Therefore, it will just kind of get hard and stiff from the inside out. Okay? Anyway, all right, so let's just start with yellow. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now, this paint has sat for a while, and therefore it's gotten a little thicker, which makes it kind of better to paint with. It's not so fluid. Therefore, it's going on a little thicker, and I may not have to paint second coats so much because of it's being kind of thicker and dried out a little bit. Okay, so just gonna lay in all the colors. I don't need to mix first. Now, this is a fairly dark. Sorry, my computer decided to quit recording on me for some reason. So anyway, started to get some green. I noticed it probably isn't quite as thick as what the yellow was. So we'll see how that is. Yeah, that's going really thin. Very transparent. So this one we'll probably want to let dry. And then put on another coat. Acrylics dry fast. Let's see, this is the difference between fairly inexpensive acrylics and acrylics that are more expensive is typically in terms of the amount of pigment that's in the paint. More pigment in the paint is usually more expensive. This is a kind of a student grade paint, so we'll come back and repaint that. So we'll do our blue now. So I'm going to go with the darker blue, the ultramarine blue, and just use that. And it too is going on really thin and transparent. So of course the opposite of transparent is opaque. Talk about opacity. Okay. So right now it looks like a much lighter color than it really is. These are actually really dark colors. Just they're so thin, the transparency of them, the whites coming through make them look lighter than what they really are. They are actually really dark colors. Okay, so let's put in our purple. Also, yeah, I think all these colors are going to be pretty much about like this.
The problem is it just has to go to one of our scheduling managers, Dr. Shaw. It looks like his schedule is pretty full. So we just need to send it to them to see if they can get you worked in sooner. And I do apologize.
Just having to.
Yes, they
Oh,
did.
it's red.
Like
Oh yeah.
I don't show where anyone's answered it yet.
A little bit of water left in my brush there, kind of thin it down, but this red's going on pretty opaque. So it's really covering the white really well. So we probably have to go back and, so I really need to make sure my brush is pretty dry every time, because that'll also thin down the paint. Now this orange seems like it's pretty thick. Still going kind of transparent there. Maybe I'll go with that. Just one coat though. Alright. Now this stuff dries fast. Plus we're painting on paper with absorbs the moisture out. Wow. Really prefer not have to keep painting these things over and over. Guess my computer's glitching. Stop recording again. Okay, so that's kind of like 3 coats on there. Still a little transparent, but you can see how dark that's gotten. That is a dark, dark green. Not all greens are that dark, but most of the colors you'll find, which is, one of the properties of color is value, and they are pretty dark usually, except for yellow. Yellow is pretty light. So hit that blue again. I guess if my recordings just keep quitting, I'll just keep recording or doing a new recording. It's better, even though these are going really thin, put multiple thin coats of paint rather than one really thick globby coat of paint. Unless you're going for that impasto textured kind of look. Which then you're kind of like sculpting with paint. Still not quite as opaque as I'd like these two to be. But anyway, let's move on. So we've got our yellow green, blue purple, red orange, and yellow orange, which are the only ones we really got to mix. And this is where the top plate comes in, because this is what we're going to mix on. Now, yellow is a really weak color. Therefore, whenever we mix it with something, we're going to have to use mostly yellow if we want the yellow to really come out, okay? So it's usually not just a 50-50 mixture of these things. You're just going to have to use your judgment. But I will say yellow is typically really weak. So, okay, so I have yellow on my brush. I'm about to get some green. Therefore, I'm only going to stick my brush into the side of the paint or the edge of it to pick up a little bit of paint, and therefore leaving a trace of yellow right there, not in the center of the paint. You never want to put other traces of paint in the center of these, because then you'll waste a lot of paint that way. So I'm just going to mix this in. Doesn't take a lot of paint, although it's coming out fairly transparent. This is where I might need something to kind of wave and dry it off real quick just so I can get a second coat on it. There's one tricky thing about acrylics. If you don't let it dry and you go to paint back over it again, sometimes it'll peel up the coat you put underneath because it'll kind of won't be dry yet and therefore it'll kind of have a skin on it. And then when you go to paint over it, then it's almost like it re-wets it and like with the paint you're about to put down, and then it'll like kind of move it out of the way, and therefore you'll have like a bald spot in your paint. That's a really difficult thing to contend with. You'll know it when it happens. Just by what I'm talking about. Yeah, didn't have it happen there, so alright, pretty happy with that. Don't think I need to adjust it. If you find your mixtures just aren't quite what you would like, just let it dry real quick, remix, then reapply. Okay, so let's make our blue-green. Now I can already tell this is going to be a really dark blue-green just because the blue and the green I'm using. So I'm going to try about a 50-50 here and see how that looks. Yeah, it looks okay. We'll go with that. Now with this green, this blue being so dark, it's like a really dark color. So if I can wave that off real quick, put a second coat on there. Now one thing you can really tell about the difference between acrylics and tempera paint is when it dries, it has a sheen to it that's different. It's a little more glossy. I won't say it's glossy, but it is definitely glossier than the tempera paint because tempera paint is just matte. I mean, it has no shine to it. Once tempera paint is dry, it is matte. Therefore, it has like no shine. Whereas you can see here how light is reflecting off these acrylics. The only thing about these, with the paint going on kind of thin like this and transparent, it kind of shows a texture. You can see the paint strokes and stuff, but when it gets really opaque, it can just be sort of a solid color. If I was to go back and put other coats on this. And unfortunately, this paint is just so thin. But it does make for transparency. Is something called like glazes. There's something called a glaze, and that's a transparent color. So these are essentially glazing in terms of what we're doing, which is a technique. So like here you can see the texture of the brush strokes in there, and that's just sort of some of the darker streaks are just where the paint's thicker and more opaque, and therefore is the transparent, thinner parts are kind of contrasting with the thicker parts. All right, so let's make our blue purple. So even though I said that was a warm blue, that green actually turned out pretty good. Actually, now looking at it, I probably should have added more blue in it. It's looking more like this than it is anything in between that. That's what I'm talking about, using your judgment. Now I'm using very little paint here. And since this is transparent, it's almost like a a blue glaze and put on top of that. Now it's a little more bluer, kind of something that's in between, and not with that shine on. I don't think you're able to see so much. Maybe you can now. Notice how much darker that looks in this color. It's just probably has more coats on it. Okay, so now let's try our blue purple. Now our recording hasn't quit on me in a while. Hopefully it won't do it again. Okay, so see if I can get paint from the edge here. I put a little too much blue there. And that's a warm blue. It's going to be really hard to find something that's really in between those two. It's going to be so similar. Okay. Looks pretty in between. Looks like something that sits in between that blue and that purple. Really need to get my hair dryer out, I think. Okay, feel pretty happy about that. Let's do our red purple. I think red is just pretty potent, so therefore probably take a little less red than purple. Yeah, red is pretty overpowering. So to make this more purple, instead of mixing purple in with all that mixture, I'm just taking what was on the brush and adding purple to it. And that's a way to change the ratio of the mixture. Because I had put more purple into all this, it would diluted down the purple that I was trying to put into it. Because I knew it needed more purple. And that's the whole key thing to color mixing is quantity, ratio in terms of how much of one with the other. Basically about like cooking, ingredients. This amount of flour, this amount of butter, or this amount of salt, or whatever it is you're putting into your recipe. And usually, like whenever you're a first time cook, if you ever cook, then you're usually really careful about measuring everything out. Where if anyone is experienced with cooking, they just have a knack for it after a while. They just kind of pretty much know how much of this and how much of that's going to get them what they want without having to pull out the measuring cups or the measuring spoons. Same thing goes with the brush. I mean, the amount of paint you grab scoop up with your brush depends on your mixture. So like I said here, like I started out with this color of red purple, but it was too red. So therefore I kept adding purple to it, it still was too red. So what I did was I just didn't add any more to that. I just used what was on the brush, picked up more purple, and just mixed into what was on the brush left over from that. Therefore, then it was a little bit of this, and then probably about the same amount of purple, and therefore got more purple into the mixture. Okay, it'll make sense after you've done it, tried it yourself, or had some experience with that. Okay, because how I kept adding purple to that, adding purple, adding purple, adding purple, adding purple, I would end up with this big batch of purple, red purple, that I wouldn't have needed. Okay, alright, so let's get into this red orange. I'm feeling they're going to be about equal in terms of the amount. Again, I got red on my brush. I'm not sticking it in the middle of the orange. I'm going to stick it into this edge to pick up the paint. Yeah, that. See how that looks on the paper. Still looks like a lot like red to me. So let me just apply the first coat. And this orange is kind of already really red anyway, in a way. So let's see if we can add more orange to that. Get that to be a little bit more of a red orange. So again, I just applied orange to what was left over on my brush from this mixture. So I'm going to try that a little bit. See if that makes a difference. Still looks awfully red to me. Now, I don't advise doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to see if I can put some orange on top of this. Kind of mix into it because it's already wet. It's much better to mix it first since I'm kind of being impatient about letting this dry. And since it's kind of speed through this real quick. Always better to mix your colors on your palette first, but since this was still wet, I just wanted to really get some orange into it. Just apply some orange directly on top of that. That seems to be working okay. Seems to be something that's fairly in between that orange and that red. Okay. Alright, last one. This is one definitely where you have to use more yellow than orange, or because yellow will just get overpowered otherwise. So I'm going to scoop up a good bit of yellow. I'm just going to take just a drop, just a very, very small amount of orange, and mix in with that. Now, I might be overdoing it with the yellow, but I'm just being very cautious. Okay, so I've been a little overly cautious. I'm going to grab just a little more orange. I'd rather do it like this where I keep adding just small amounts to dial it in. I think that's going to do it. Okay. Computer stayed on. I was able to record the rest of that. And that is it. From there, just again, make sure you use soap when you wash out your brush. And now I know this is going to be dirty, but we're just going to have to deal with it. You can probably go rinse this, but your plate will probably wear and break over time. It's almost better just let the paint dry and just paint on top of it when you do your mixtures in the future, okay? So I wouldn't stress about that as far as having a clean palette every time you paint, okay? Alright, and just make sure to seal that up in the bag. And that'll keep your acrylics moist. Now, I will say this, over time your acrylics might end up start to dry on you. You might have to find something like a little spray bottle or maybe flick some water on there, but you could spray a little bit of water on there, and then that will also help keep them a little moist because they're already starting to dry because these are kind of old, have been sitting for a while. So don't want to put too much water on it though. And sometimes maybe that does create a little bit of mold. So like I said, if it does, you can just scrape it off the top of the paint, okay? Alright. And that is it.